Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Derek Johnson. I'm Chief Marketing Officer for Building God's Way. And today I have Matt Roberts, Pastor Matt Roberts from the Genesis Project with me. And what we wanted to do is this is what we hope to be kind of a first in a series of short videos that just is really just sharing some information from some of our strategic partners and friends of Building God's Way. And we've seen a lot of information out there about kind of how to cope through the crisis that we're in, maybe how to deal with what we're going through. But maybe the focus of this is really sort of positioning ourselves, or maybe things that we can do as churches to prepare ourselves for what could be really a new normal, a new way of doing ministry, and what are some strategies and things that we can do to position our ministries and be prepared for that. And I've asked Pastor Matt to join me today. Matt's become just a really close friend of Building God's Way. He works with a lot of our clients nationally that are going into design and construction, and others that are just maybe a ways away from that, but he really helps them with strategic planning. He's provided a lot of coaching services and has really become a great resource for us. And so I asked him to just share some things about what he's seeing and kind of what his ministry is going through, and maybe share a little bit about the strategic planning side of what he does through the Genesis Project and a program called StratOps. And maybe that can help some of our ministries that might be tuning into this. And so, Matt, I'll turn it over to you. What's one big thing that you think ministries could be focusing on right now, maybe to remain focused on their long-range vision, or to just prepare themselves for what it looking like a new normal for a lot of us?
Derek, thanks for having me today. And I think for all of us as pastors and as ministries, this pandemic and this shutdown came out of nowhere. I'm sure there were very few of us as church leaders and churches that had some type of a contingency plan in place for how we were going to deal with just the shutdown. I know for our church, which is probably the same for churches across the nation, and we had about 2 days to prepare from a Friday to a Sunday for what has just ended up being this unprecedented, extended time. And the one thing that I want to share with you today as a pastor and a ministry leader is the big idea of strategy. Although we didn't have really a strategic ramp heading into this, I think one thing that is become crystal clear for us as churches is that we are heading into a new normal. That the way in which this spigot of meeting and worshiping together is going to get turned back on is going to require us as church leaders to really think and strategize outside of the box, because I don't think any state in America is just going to open things back up and say, okay, just go back to doing church as you normally are going to or have done church in the past. And I'm reminded of 1 Chronicles chapter 12, when the Bible lists out for us all of the mighty men of David that fought alongside of him. And it's an interesting list because we read of those who were proficient horsemen, those who are proficient in battle with a sword and a shield, those who are proficient with a spear. And then at the very end of that chapter, in verse 32, the Bible tells us, and there were the men of Issachar who understood the signs of the times and knew where Israel should go. And I believe that this is a time for us to really tap into the heart and the giftedness of the men of Issachar. Those who could really see what was going on in the culture of Israel, understand where the people were emotionally and where the community stood, and were able to be a resource to King David during that time to really help lead spiritually and politically in what was often a volatile climate for David. And so my suggestion for you as a pastor and a team would be start today. even though the future is pretty unknown for us. I don't think there's many churches out there that understand specific dates and times when things are going to come back to us, but to start discussing strategy now, to put together a team at your church that become those men and women of Issachar who can understand the signs of the times, who can keep their ear to the culture and the climate of what's going on inside of your church and begin to lay out a strategic framework and saying, how do we come back inside of this new normal that exists for us? And some of the things that we've been thinking about as a team that I would encourage you to think through is social distancing is just going to be a norm for us. Even as we're able to come back as churches, there's going to be responsibility placed upon us. How do we keep people at that 6 feet safe social distance? If you have a drawing of your space, man, I think you have people inside of your church that can maybe just help you think logistically through how do we go back to doing services. I know for us, one of the things that we're planning on doing when we can is going back to more services than we had, understanding we can put less people in our building. And we want to understand before the government opens the floodgates of how we're going to do that effectively and safe, because ultimately we want our community to see that we're not coming back just haphazardly, but we're coming back with a clear strategy to be diligent in keeping people safe. And I believe that this is a time where most of our people are really going to appreciate that deliberate way in which we conduct ourselves coming back. So a social distancing plan, I think, to put together a team inside of your church that can specifically think about children's ministry. I know for us, how in the world do you keep a room full of toddlers safe? Because what's the first thing that kids want to do is just run together, play on the same things. What are we doing with the toys and the play structures inside of our building? To start thinking through that now, because if we wait for the week we're coming back, we're just going to be so far behind the curve in order to catch up with this. So I think now for you to start engaging your leaders, some people on your staff, to put some core team members as think tanks and leadership groups around some of these trouble spots. What are we going to do with services and social distancing? What are we going to do with kids ministry and how we do that? What is kind of a rollout plan for us as we move forward? Because I believe that this is at least going to be an issue we're going to be grappling with into the fall. And if you listen to a lot of people, it may be even further out with that. So what's our short-term strategy in order to say, how do we come back most effectively for our community? And what's our long-term strategy and maybe how we start to do things a little bit different moving forward from this point on? And when it comes to that strategy, I think now is the time that we've got a lot of people who are looking for opportunities to engage. These are meetings we can host virtually. And what it does is it brings those early adopters in to kind of own this process, right? And so I think in all of our strategy teams, we need people who are policy and procedure people, which those people are really important to your team, but also make sure that you're adding the hospitality portion to that team too, to counterbalance it and say, how do we cap a service at what is a safe social distancing number? And if we have to turn away people, how do we do that in a loving, gracious way with an alternative in place? One of the things that we're hearing is likely we will be required as churches to take people's temperature at the door as they come back. So by the way, start shopping for those things now, personal protective equipment and masks. Make sure you're prepared to have all of those things available for your church as they come back, but also think through, like, what happens when we have someone who shows up at our church doors to worship and they are running a fever? How do we love that person and serve that person without just putting up a big X and saying you're not welcome and you can't be here? So what's kind of the systems to deal with all of these things? one of the things I think we're all concerned about right now is our most vulnerable inside of our communities. What are we doing with our senior citizens? What are we doing with those who are immune compromised? And maybe you would consider with a team, if there's enough interest, starting an early morning service that's just set up for the most compromised, where you're at your most diligent inside of there. So the key is this: one strategy doesn't fit every church that we're speaking to today. Your church is unique. You might have a church where people are going to be very, very timid to come back, and that faucet's going to have to be turned on really slowly. You might have a church where you see people rushing back and really filling up your church building that first week. Make sure that you're tapping into people and say, as we start planning on coming back, where are people thinking? Where is Israel at? What are the signs of the times that are all around us for our ministry? And what is our strategy to come back as fast and safe and effective as we possibly can as a church? And I'll tell you, we would love to sit down and have these conversations with you. One of the things that we believe in as a team is that strategy doesn't come through consulting. Because the truth is, I cannot understand the heartbeat and the temperature of your church and your congregation better than you as a pastor and a leader. And so one of the things that we would love to do is to help you with strategy moving forward and really ask some of the right questions. And so much of that is easily done virtually today, where sometimes some of the right questions to ask. So for example, how are you going to be doing communion moving forward? How do we make sure that as we celebrate sacrament together, that there's not 3 or 4 different sets of hands on the same plates and touch? That's a big issue that changes the way we do that as a church, and probably you. What about offerings? The idea of passing an offering basket just doesn't work anymore, right? It's not the safest thing to do. One of the things I can tell you that we're talking about as a church is maybe using this time to completely get away from taking a physical offering inside of our service. That does 2 things. It keeps people safer and takes away that thing that everybody's touching, but it also says this could happen again. And we've all seen those people prognosticating that maybe the fall there's a surge, right? That maybe something comes back where we have to step back down our engagement. And so I would tell you, maybe there's an initiative financially to go to your church and say, hey, right now, we want to push as many people as we can, continue to push as many people as you can through online giving, text giving, and really get our church away from that physical giving, where if we have to go back to a quarantine at some point in time, that maybe our church is a little bit better prepared to be able to do that moving forward. So those are all just really good questions for us to grapple with, for us to wrestle with. And I think if we have a strategy, then we're going to be able to react and to respond. And what's exciting to me is maybe lead the way in our community, to show the way how other businesses and how other people can do it. Like maybe as churches, we're going to be able to go back so well that all of a sudden our government starts coming to us and saying, hey, could you help schools think through some of this stuff? Could you help small businesses? And it's that strategy and that insight, that wisdom that God has given us as his church that I believe is going to put us in a great place to lead our communities moving forward proactively. And again, I'll tell you, none of us had I don't think any of us had the ramp or the foresight to be strategic heading into this. So man, my one big call to you as a pastor today would be this, where we didn't have strategy coming in, let us have clear spirit-led strategy to lead our community forward. And let's take the charge on that. Let's be a place where our world looks and says, man, the churches are doing it better than anybody. And then we have an opportunity to shine the light of Jesus in places we've maybe never had the opportunity before in our communities.
Amen to that. That's great advice, Matt. I love what you said about, I think it's so important to be proactive rather than reactive to this. And, just even through an uncertain time when we don't know a lot about what the future holds, we can still have a very strategic approach to what we're doing and how we're going to respond, regardless of what happens, regardless of what direction this thing takes. And I love that idea of getting out in front and leading our people with strategic vision and planning. Matt and his team at the Genesis Project do what we call story calls for a lot of churches around the country, and it's just been a great tool for us to have that pastor to pastor connection. We do it with a lot of churches that are beginning their path towards design and construction. But we've also utilized this as a tool during this time for pastors, just to have another pastor to lean on. If you feel like that could be a tool, we'd love to extend that to you. I'll include some information along with this video about that as well, where you can sign up for that short 30-minute pastor to pastor, what we call a story call, and just really connect to other pastors that are going through what you're going through, and maybe lean on someone with shared experience. Really appreciate your time, Matt, and we hope to have some of our other strategic partners in some of these other areas like funding and capital campaigns, worship technology. We've got a network of partners that want to share resources to our pastors out there, and just really help provide you with information that can really help you kind of not only survive this time, but really thrive and be prepared and position your ministry for success and vibrancy leading out of this. So thank you so much, Matt, for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Derek. And pastors, if, as Derek said, if there's any way we can serve you, walk with you in this time, help you develop a strategy of ministry moving forward, we would love to. And I know the entire BGW team right now would, if we can help with just seating charts and flow and understanding, what your capacity could be with social distancing. Like, those are all things that we have just got a great team of people that would love to help you take a look and speak into those things. And we always hope that that through BGW you have just trusted advisors and trusted partners that count it an honor and a privilege to serve the church, and we would love to do that.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, and thanks again, Matt.
All right, thank you.
Bye.